are the results for the smokers that we tested in DISH. The third column is the results for DSHS staff before we left Austin. The next column is the results for DSHS staff after spending a few days from DISH. And the last two columns are the levels that we identified in several analytical method papers. The numbers in brackets behind the last two columns refer to the reference in our final report. On the horizontal or on the vertical axis, the urinary metabolite results are presented in micrograms per gram creatinine. This graph is for the results for PMA, which is a urinary metabolite of benzene. PMA results were well within the ranges presented in the published reports for non-smokers and for smokers. And as benzene is a component of cigarette smoke, we expect to see higher levels in smokers. This is the results for DHBM, which is a urinary metabolite of 1,3-butadiene. And DHBM results for non-smokers were similar to the levels of DSHS staff before we left Austin. 1,3-butadiene is also a component of tobacco smoke, so we expect to see the higher levels in their smokers. This is the graph for BMA, which is a urinary metabolite of toluene. And again, the BMA results were similar to the levels measured in DSHS staff in Austin. And toluene is another component of tobacco smoke, so we expect to see the higher levels in the smokers. ANCA is a non-specific urinary metabolite of DMF, or N,N-dimethylformamide. What that means is that its formation could be due to other chemicals besides the dimethylformamide. Results in non-smokers were similar to DSHS staff and to others non-smokers in the published literature. While we cannot identify potential exposure sources, it's clear that levels are higher in smokers, both from the results here in DISH as well as from the published analytical method papers. Tap water samples were analyzed for these 11 compounds, and the results were compared to the Environmental Protection Agency's maximum contaminant level, or MCL. The MCLs are contaminant-specific regulatory standards representing the maximum concentration of a chemical that is allowed in a public drinking water system. Only total trihalomethane, which is the sum of bromoform, bromodichloromethane, chloroform, and dibromochloromethane, were found at levels above the MCL. All other contaminants in the tap water were at least 60 times below their respective MCL. Total trihalomethanes, or TTHMs, exceeded the MCL in one tap water sample. Disinfectant byproducts form when chlorine is used to keep drinking water safe by removing the harmful biological organisms that could be in tap water. The risk associated with the exposure to these compounds is generally far outweighed by the risk of not using chlorination and being exposed to biological organisms. However, when there is exposure to high levels of these chemicals, we are concerned about excess exposure from drinking the water, from having skin contact with the water when you use the water or take a shower, and from inhalation of vapors when the water is used in the home. Because of this, we worked with the TCEQ staff to identify the water supplier for this household, and the water supplier will make modifications and monitor and control the levels of these contaminants in this portion of the water system. This investigation was designed to answer a specific question. Do the people living in the DISH area have unusually high levels of VOCs in their blood compared to the general United States population? Although we could not determine specifically the source of exposures, we could evaluate patterns of exposures to VOCs to look at potential community-wide exposures. As with any investigation, there were limitations for this investigation. The first is that this investigation only captured information about recent exposures. VOCs have a short half-life in the body, thus unless the exposures are known to be ongoing, this investigation only captured information about recent exposures. This was a one-time sampling event, and we could not consider external factors that could affect the results, such as changes in temperature or weather conditions or variations in the natural gas operations. We were also limited in the types of comparisons that we could make with the urinary results. We compared, as the data for national levels of urinary metabolites for the general United States population are not available, We compared the results to DSHS staff as well as several published analytical method papers. In most instances, we could not identify exposure sources, definitively identify exposure sources, and it's not possible to determine health risk based on the levels found in the blood. For the majority of the participants in this investigation, the levels of VOCs measured in blood were similar to those measured in the general United States population, meaning that their exposures were not different than people living in other areas of the United States. While we found some VOCs in some people, the pattern of exposure was not consistent with the community-wide exposure. Most exposures were due to other factors such as smoking, disinfectant byproducts, or use of consumer products. Blood benzene levels were only elevated in smokers, and this was verified by an exposure survey as well as by the presence of the 2,5-dimethylfuran in the blood. There was a dose-response relationship between the time since the last cigarette and the level of these VTEX compounds in benzene in the blood. Tobacco smoke is a major contributor to blood benzene levels across the entire United States. Although we don't have information about levels of urinary metabolites in the general United States population, we did compare the results of the urine samples to the DSHS staff results and to published analytical method papers. And AMCA was the only compound that appeared to be higher, but the reason for this difference is not known. For most of the VOCs that we tested in tap water, the levels were well below the regulatory standards set by the EPA. However, one tap water sample did have levels of the trihalomethanes above the MCL. Community members reported concerns about headaches, respiratory problems, itchy and watery eyes, and other allergy-like symptoms. These symptoms are all nonspecific with multiple possible causes. Residents were also concerned about odors, noise, and the gas well operations. Although we did not measure noise levels or take ambient air samples, we did note the presence of both odors and noise during our visits to the site. Odors and noise can affect quality of life and are usually governed by local city ordinances. And other than smoking, for which there is a biological marker, we cannot state with any degree of certainty the exact nature of the exposures. Our estimations are based on the combination of the exposures and upon the exposure survey. And I'll hand it back over to Nancy.
I'll just remind you again that if you'd like to have ask a question, please send it in mic, let us know your name and where you live. And also, if at this point in time it's limited to one question so that we can get around to everyone, we'll be happy for you to get back in line and come back again. But that way we can get questions from all different types of people. Do any of the commissioners or the council mayor have any initial questions?
Well, I certainly do. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you for conducting the study. Deeply appreciate that part of the effort. I think I'm a little disappointed in the way the study was conducted. I think it was pretty random and fairly unscientific. I think you admit to that in your report, although your conclusions seem to be pretty concrete. The 95 percentile seems a little strange to me. I mean, I read your report and I see where you have, you detected these toxins in pretty much everybody that you tested, but you painted it with such a broad brush. And I realize that when you paint with a broad brush, you can cover up a whole lot more dirt. But I really am disturbed by